All right, so let's connect to Redis database using Spring Boot. The process is very simple. It's similar to the previous Spring Data JPA and the Spring Data MongoDB. So we have to firstly add this dependency, which is Spring Boot starter data Redis. So this has all the dependencies to connect to Redis and set up all the Redis related connectivities, managers, so on and so forth. So after that, just make sure you refresh the Maven project to let it download the dependencies, and that's it. So you don't have to put a lot of configurations there. Probably there's tutorials ask you to put like SpringCache type equal to Redis, because this is optional. You don't have to do that. So this is because if you have multiple different databases, you have to let Spring to know which one you want to use. But so for this project, we have only one Redis as the in-memory database for the cache, so we don't need to put this here. Okay, and everything keeps the same. So cache evict on the add, and also have a get all ingredient. Okay, put the cache there. We can use a cacheable or cache put. That depends. If we look at this here, okay, so there's a explanation. So its annotation indicate that the result of invoking a method, okay, can be cached. Okay, so each time a device method is invoked, cache behavior will be applied. Okay, so then this is the annotation, and also we have a cache put. Okay, oops. Okay, so this annotation here. Okay, so this one's it's annotation indicating that a method triggers a cache put operation. Okay, so in contrast to the cacheable annotation, this annotation does not cause a device method to be skipped. Okay, rather it always calls the method to be invoked and its result to be stored. Okay, so means that like this is more like a operation to add to the database. Okay, so like for the add method. Okay, so we want, because this put always put things, call the method and put the result. Okay, so always will be called. But the cacheable, it means that if you don't have it, I'll add it. If you have it in the cache, then I will just return. I won't call the method. Okay, so this is the main difference between those two. Okay, so then come back to our service layer. I'll put all the annotations in the service layer. You can also use it in the repository layer, okay, in the interface layer. Interfaces of the repositories. Also, you can use it in the controller. It all depends on whether you want to reuse some cache or not. Okay, so for the time being, we just put everything in the service layer here. And now let's take a look. And for our Redis, it's empty. Now I just connect it to our local host. Okay, so nothing is there. And in the Docker, we have already started. So in the Postman, oops, where's my Postman? Okay, and we get everything. Okay, so sorry, I just restart the server, and then send. Okay, so we're gonna get an error, and let's look at what's the error is. So the error is saying that not serializable exception. Okay, so for this class ingredient response. Why? It's because Redis, it saves a byte as the value. Okay, so no matter string or list or hash or set or z set, it's all byte. But this class in object, right, in Java, it's just in memory. It's not in the byte format. It's just spread it into your heap. Okay, so we have to make sure that this class can be converted. Okay, not this class, or so this object cannot be converted into a byte stream so that it can be saved to the database. Okay, so that's why it's called a not serializable exception, because this class itself cannot be saved to the database, okay, automatically. So two ways we have to serialize this, actually multiple ways, but commonly used. Okay, first we can use the default JDK serializable interface. Okay, we just need to implement the serializable interface. Okay, serializable interface. And in this case, now Java itself, right, JVM, can serialize all the objects from this class into a byte stream, okay, so that we can save these bytes into the database, any kind of database. Okay, so after doing this, okay, very simple, and now we restart the application and use Postman, call it. Okay, so now you see we got the data, we got the database query. This is the SQL database query, okay? So not the Redis query. And the Redis also got the cache because we have the cacheable annotation, okay? So this is the serialized format of that list. Okay, it's not very human readable, but we can still see, some of the example like tomato, butter, all data is kind of there. So it's not human readable, but Java can understand it, right? So that is why, every time we now call this API, where's my postman? Keep hiding from me. Okay. And you can see we still get the data, but no database query, no SQL database query, okay, is fired. It's because we have the data always there. Now if we add a new one, okay, so if we add a new orange 5, send, okay, so then this will cause the cache to be evicted. So if we refresh it, now you can see the cache is gone, right? So next time I send a get, cacheable annotation kick in, okay, send a new database query, get the data, put it into the cache, which is the Redis database, and then now we have the cache here. Okay, so this is the whole process, and a couple of things need to be done. Still, first is this data is kind of like the key is not very meaningful. Value is also not very meaningful. If you want to query or search something, it's going to be very, very hard, right, to do that. Let's say from other part of the system or even from other systems. So let's just update like the key generation strategy, and also we want to convert the value into JSON, which makes more sense. Okay. So before we get started, so at this moment you can skip the rest of the video, is because you just get to know how Redis is working, how to connect with Redis. You don't need to be dig deep into how to do each individual part, because I believe every project has its own unique requirement, unique key generation strategy, policies, and even the values serialization policies. So you just need to know, okay, we have the way that we can just customize the key and the values. That's good enough, okay? The rest of the video is going to be a little bit tedious because we can have a lot of detail there. Okay, so let's see. First, we need to customize the key. For the key, we can do, let's see, in the all ingredient, right? So by default, it says the simple key, which is a default name, okay? Which is okay, but doesn't make quite sense. So let's just can use this key, okay? Or we can have a key generator, those two fields. And we can give it a more like meaningful name, right? Like all ingredient. Okay, so we put this here, and then we restart the system. Then come back, okay, and refresh. Nothing happened. Why? Because we didn't call the API, right? So we have to call it first. Call it once, and then the cache will be populated. Okay, so it will read from the database, then put it into the Redis. Okay, so now you can see ingredient, column, all ingredient. So this ingredient is a namespace, right? Just let's assume we also have a cache about menu, cache about order, cache about customer. So we can use this namespace to differentiate different cache. Okay, so Spring use this cache name field, okay, to indicate. All right, so this is the key. But what if I want a more dynamic key, right? For this get all ingredient, it's just a one method, doesn't take any input. But let's see if all get ingredient by ID. All right, so then this one will have a differentiator here, ID. So we can use the same idea, okay? And we put also in the ingredient, but the key now we can just change it to, we use expression language, okay, ID. Right, so it means that every time the user try to get some particular ID ingredient, okay, some ingredient by ID, then we're gonna put this ingredient into the cache, okay, with ingredient column ID, okay, and then the value will be ingredient. But so for here, this ingredient, it need to be a serializable, right? So we need to make sure it implements serializable interface here. So then let's refresh and see. Okay, and then postman, get by ID, right? Get by 1, for example. Send. Okay, 1 is milk, everything good, and then check the cache, right? So next you can see ingredient 1, right, which is milk, is here. Okay, so just to be careful, every time you apply a cache, you have to think about what if it got updated, what if it got deleted, right? So you have to also do something to the database. So that's where, you know, we have to think about, like, you know, what if we have the method is add is called, right? The add is okay, right? Because it doesn't hurt the existing ingredient. But what if update is called? Right, so in this case, update is called. We have two choices. One is to override the existing cache with a new value. Another one is we just delete it. Okay, so but for this particular case, override it is not possible at this moment, is because this value is here, and then this value is here, is this, right? So they are different class. And if you look at the value, so Java serialization and deserialization, okay, so it has the type in it. So it will give us error. But bypass it, we can actually evict it, right? So we can just evict, we just copy this line, put it here, okay? And then ingredient, and then not all entries now. Let's just only evict the particular one, okay? So we can have the request.id. Okay, so in this case, it will only evict the ingredient with this key. Okay, so it means that, like, you know, ingredient column and with a key. So if I update the request, update the ingredient with the request ID is 1, then that cache will also be updated. Okay, so in the database. Let's just try it out. Okay, restart, and so now, quick question, okay? If I call this /ingredient/1, will it call the database? Okay, so for all the previous tests or demos, it's always like the first time, well, you know, we restart the server, first time we call the API, then it will call the database. But for this one, okay, you can see it returns us value, but there is no database query. Okay, this is why. It's because our cache is there all the time. We didn't delete the cache. The cache is in our Docker container. All right, so if the application try to run this method, it will try firstly to check if the cache is there or not. All the previous in-memory cache, okay, so we are using either using different cache name or using the in-memory cache, where every time we restart, the cache is gone, is deleted, right? That's why every time we call the API, it always calls the database first. But actually, if we use Redis server as an external cache, then restarting the server itself, like restarting the application server or backend server, okay, it has nothing to do with the database query, as long as you have the cache in the memory, okay, in your Redis server. Okay, so that's a very quick test. All right, and anyways, so now let's just call this update, okay? Update, and we can just simply call the put method, and ID is 1. Okay, let's change it to soybean. Let's send. Okay, so ID 1 soybean got changed, and in the database it should be changed already. Okay, so we can just check the database ingredient. Okay, now it's soybean. And then in the cache, okay, so this is the old value, milk, right? If I refresh it, it's gone, right? So because we have a cache evict, it's gone. Now, then if I call it again, okay, get and soybean, and then in the cache, it will show. Okay, so this is a one way, okay, to make sure your cache is updated along with your database. Okay, and another way is to use cache put. Okay, so means like every time we can just use a cache, but because the type is different. Okay, let's just try it. If we put cache put here, and if we refresh, all right, and then we update this number 1 to okay, just some soda, okay, and then update. Okay, you can see this updated, and the cache is also updated. Okay. Okay, so that's how to update the keys. But there's a cache here, so there's a catch here. Okay, so it's because now you can see if we save this key, okay, save. Wait a second, where is it? Save this object, okay, using. Wait, sorry, this one. Okay, so save this object ingredient response into the cache ingredient with ID, and when we read it out, we're gonna read out using the same cache, same key, okay, from this method, but it's in a different class. All right, so that will cause issue, which is a type incompatible issue. Okay, so because we save this cache as an ingredient response class, but when we read it out as an ingredient, as this method is indicating. So in this case, Spring will give us error. Okay, so let's see if we send a request. Okay, get ingredient 1, and then it will give us this error. Okay, saying that the class cast, okay, issue. So this is a Spring stuff, Spring like type constraint issue. So when you do the cache, you'd better make sure that the types, okay, the class type that you used to be serialized into the database is the same type that you want to deserialize it back. Okay, so if you remember when we created the REST API, I just intentionally leave this class as different from other classes. Okay, so to indicate that we can have different types in the service layer, but it's not good practice. Okay, so in this case, we'd better make this ingredient as an ingredient response, so that in the long run it can benefit our cache mechanism, right? It also can benefit our front end and back end data field flexibility. Like we can just change the database, but we don't need to change the API return type. Okay, but anyways, so let's just stop here, and we're gonna change the value of the our cache. Okay, so for here now we are using the default JDK serialization mechanism, and now we just change the key, all right, of the Redis, but now we want to change this value into JSON, for example, to make it more user-friendly or readable. Okay, and it has more usage instead of just Java object serialization. All right.